So welcome. So today we're going to be talking about fear and can we actually overcome it? Is it something that can actually be channeled? Or is it something we're just going to have to deal with because that's who we are? Welcome to another episode of Topical Talkology with Andy and Theo.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So the topic that I wanted to start on this week was because I was at a meeting last night. I just want to give you a little background into this story. So on Monday night, I called a colleague of mine. I belong to an organisation, and where in some cases we learn pretty old English type text, and we recite it word for word. There's no ad-libbing. There's not a lot of flexibility in the text. You don't have poetic license. It's quite a structured process. So I've been belonging to this for about nearly 30 years, and it's my hobby. It makes me sound a bit like an anorak, really, but hey. So I had to learn this piece of ritual because yesterday we had an 150th anniversary. So there was going to be a lot of people there, a lot of highly influential people who were attending this meeting, and a lot of people. So I had to learn this script. So I solidly spent my time 4 months learning this. So on Monday night, I spoke to a colleague of mine, and I was just going over a couple of things with him. He says, "Andy, you've learned the wrong ritual." I think I've just given it away there, haven't I? He says, "Andy, I've just given the wrong ritual." And turns out that I actually had then, rather than months, I had 2 days to learn quite a complicated chunk of ritual and deliver it. And you know what? The problem is when you've got to take responsibility, because the thing is people are relying on you to do something. So what happened is I learned it for 2 days solid. Got 3 nights sleep each night, and I worked. And you know what? I was pretty good. I was pretty impressed. But all of a sudden, because it wasn't months and it wasn't 2 days, what happened that when I saw all the people around, I lost a bit of my emotional control. And I know how to manage my state better than most people. But on this particular occasion, my ego kicked in. I got into my head and became about me. And about an hour before the meeting, I started getting anxious. I started getting nervous. And I thought, oh, what if I screw up? And self-doubt creeps in. And what happens when self-doubt creeps in? What happens? What's released into your system when self-doubt creeps in? Theo, what happens when self-doubt creeps into your system? Cortisol.
Cortisol, but it paralyzes you.
It paralyzes you, yeah. So this is what's called an amygdala hijack. And because the thing is, we've got the limbic system, which is the part of the brain which is our unconscious memory. And the amygdala is just is in the limbic system, or just behind it, right at the bottom. And what happens is, as soon and because that's been part of our brains for millions of years, and our prefrontal cortex, which is our rational thinking, is actually quite new to us. This is what separates us from the rest of the animals. But the thing is, the limbic system, or the amygdala, is so much more powerful because it's so much more trained and more developed, that once that takes over, any rational thought goes out of your head. And
because it becomes instinctual survival.
It becomes instinctual fight or flight. And that's what happened. Or freeze, fight or flight. And there was a point where I actually froze. And I had a really bad night. So what I did well in a rehearsal about an hour earlier, I then had to do it on the night, and I went to pieces because all my ego, all my fears, everything kicked into it. And although some people said I was not as bad as I thought I was, and they were all very comforting, but the problem is the marketplace sees what it sees. It doesn't care about the story. It doesn't care what's happening. It doesn't care that your mother's died. It doesn't care. Only cares what it sees in front of them. So when this very highly influential person said to me, "I know the story," because someone had told him that I only had 2 days to learn it, I said to him, "Well, thank you very much. You're very kind, but the marketplace only sees what it sees. It has no feelings other than that." Which sounds quite ruthless, doesn't it? So Theo, now I've told that story, how do you overcome fear?
Okay, the fact is, you don't.
Really?
No, you don't overcome fear because fear controls you. Remember, anxiety is our primitive survival mechanism. In fact, it's the primitive survival mechanism of any living organism, because it does two things. It motivates you to achieve basic needs of survival and motivates you to stay awake and aware so that you escape predators. So those are the two functions of anxiety.
Right.
And the way that nature makes anxiety work for you is the quickest possible way, which is instinct. So that if you see a saber-toothed tiger running towards you, you're not going to think, aha, that's a saber-toothed tiger, perhaps I should run. You just go without thinking. So nature worked out that acting on instinct is the quickest way of passing your genes to the next generation, because you're more likely to survive. Similarly, nature worked out millions of years ago that wandering the plains as a nomad is not going to be as effective in passing your genes to the next generation as living in a tribe. Now, what that means is, when you start having this level of anxiety, the first thing you've got to do is just tell yourself, you've got to accept it, you've got to say, this is anxiety, this is anxious thoughts. Whereas what you're doing is you're thinking, oh my God, what do I do? No, the first thing is you say, I'm anxious.
Yeah. But I want to ask you this, because I'm normally a fairly controlled person when it comes to this, and when I've done ritual in the past before, I'm usually actually, I've got to say, without sounding egotistical, I'm normally quite exceptional in this.
But there are 3 points to mention. The first,
okay,
the first is you'd drunk quite a lot of caffeine.
I had drunk a lot of caffeine, so how's that going to impact me? I just told you that this morning, didn't I?
Caffeine makes you anxious if you have too much of it, and some people are more sensitive than others.
And guess what? Do you know why I had so much caffeine yesterday? Because I was anxious. So there's a bit of a catch-22.
I know. Plus, you, because I think you're on a new medication, and you took a bit of that on top of the caffeine, so that didn't help either.
Yes, I won't share that medication just yet. You'll have to come into next week's episode.
That medication makes the effects of the caffeine even worse.
Okay.
Secondly, you had in your mind the idea that it was a challenge, that it was a very difficult obstacle for you to overcome. But it was something you needed to do because the consequences of you not performing were going to be serious.
Well, it was letting other people down for an 150th celebration.
So therefore, the magnitude of the task ahead of you became a need, something you needed to do.
That's correct.
It wasn't something you wanted to do, it was something you needed to do. But remember, nature has only given us 4 needs: air, food, water, shelter, and of course the abstract need of sense of belonging. Those are our survival needs.
Do we have procreation as well in there?
But if you don't belong anywhere, you're not going to procreate.
Okay, well, good point.
So everything else is not a need, it's a want. But the problem is that the consequences of not getting a need is death. The consequences of not getting something you want are various levels of disappointment, but not death. But we live our lives with illusionary needs because we're all cavemen. So as soon as we leave whatever we're doing, we're wandering the urban jungle looking for survival needs, and modern society gives us an infinite number of illusionary needs, which we chase with the same zeal that we do real needs. And of course, that's what happened to you. Delivering that talk was a need which in your primitive amygdala was a survival need.
Right.
And the consequences therefore of you not performing were catastrophic.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because I did a lot of self-awareness last night, because as I said, once the cortisol was in my system, it was I couldn't even it was too hard to change it. But you said to me this morning, did you not do the Amy Cuddy power postures? And the power postures is, you'll probably find a TED talk on it. I think it's the Power Postures of Body Language by Amy Cuddy. It's a TED talk, great TED talk. And she talks about if you do power postures for 2 minutes, what happens is that increases your testosterone, reduces your cortisol by as much as 20%. But the thing is, once I had the amygdala hijack, your emotions are high, your intelligence is low. Do you think that would even come into my conscious mind?
It didn't come out. You needed, at that point, you needed someone like me to say, "Hey, buddy, do your power."
Yeah,
posture.
I know. I wish I'd known at the time. But let me ask you this, because the thing is, one thing that concerned me was, and because I want to say, I beat myself about it last night. I did beat myself up about it, and people say, "Oh, Andy, don't beat yourself about it." But the thing is, it's okay for me to beat myself up about it. It's like when people said before, "Andy, you'll be fine. Don't worry. You'll relax." The thing is, that doesn't change anything.
No, it's not okay to beat yourself up about it because you're still treating it like a disaster.
No. For me, it was because I've got certain standards that I need to maintain. However, I also recognise that I accepted, and the thing is, sometimes you need to accept these things. If something disappoints you, if it beats you up, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to say this: let it beat you up, because the next day is going to get better. Yeah. You need to, because it's going to go over in your head anyway. No matter what someone says to you, it's going to go over in your head. So let it go. Accept it. Accept that it's going to be in your head. But the next day, you just do some self-reflection. Find out, what is it that I need to change so it doesn't actually happen again? Because I'll tell you something, you're going to learn a hell of a lot more from your mistakes than you will ever do from your successes.
Always the case.
And you'll always be stronger for it.
If you accept and learn, absolutely.
Accept it. Because I'll tell you something, because I said, I came home last night and I said, I will never allow that to ever happen again.
You spent the whole week feeling out of control, because that's exactly what a need is. A need is something you have to do. Yeah. You don't have a choice, therefore it's not under your control. And the key definition of stress is how much in control you are. Therefore, you spent the whole week with a high level of cortisol shooting through your system.
Yeah, all week.
You know what that also does? That actually shortens your lifespan. So it's been shown that your mindset shortens the telomeres at the end of your chromosomes. The telomeres are the little bits of shoelace, the loose shoelace at the end of your chromosomes, and each time they divide, they get a little bit shorter, and when they reach a certain length, the cell dies. Now, if you have a negative mindset shooting up your cortisol levels, that shortens your telomere lengths. Conversely, if you have a positive frame of mind, that lengthens the lengths of your telomeres. Same research has been done in carers looking after their aged parents suffering from dementia or various physical ailments. They have found that as basically being a carer for either your partner or your parent shortens your lifespan, unless you have a positive mental state and you view it as a challenge rather than a chore. So for you, the way that most of us need to look at these things, all of us need to look at this kind of thing, or any task that we do, is something that we choose to do, that we want to do, therefore we are in control of it.
Because I want to ask you this, so how does that relate to emotional intelligence? Because the thing is, there was a point where in my beating myself up, because once you go down that downhill spiral, you keep on going down. I mean, you know, most of you have been there. If you haven't, then
emotional intelligence is a natural component that all of us have, unless we have Asperger's syndrome. And what it shows is an ability to empathise. Therefore,
an ability to empathise.
An ability to empathise, because that makes you more likeable. If you cannot empathise with anyone, they will not like you. And that is hugely important in determining how successful you will be within a society. The amount by which you can empathise and demonstrate empathy.
Okay, so we're talking about empathy. But so how do you define emotional intelligence then?
Sorry?
How do you define emotional intelligence?
I've just defined it. So it's your ability to empathise with someone.
But okay.
Because that shows your ability to understand someone else's point of view.
Because I wanted to sort of touch on the emotional intelligence of actually that control of your emotions.
That's different. So
isn't that emotional intelligence?
Emotional intelligence is it could be, I guess, but I took it to be your understanding of those around you in terms of how you communicate emotionally.
No, I'm talking about your control of your emotions in situations, so you don't let yourself get out of control.
Funnily enough, that requires less emotional intelligence to do. Weirdly enough, because the less emotionally intelligent you are, the less controlled by your emotions you are, because it's impossible to be in control of your emotions. because, as we said, we respond reflexly to them.
Okay.
The only thing you can do is stop trying to control them. As soon as you try and control your emotion, it makes you focus more on it and therefore puts you more at its mercy.